The sound of rain pattered against the window as Robert Marshall adjusted his tie in the reflection of his car window. Atlanta's skyline was partially obscured by a thick blanket of fog, the tops of buildings disappearing into the gray autumn morning like ghosts. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wet pavement and fallen leaves. His fingers tightened around the handle of his leather briefcase, Italian, a gift to himself when he secured the funding to purchase this very building 5 years ago. "Today's the day," he whispered to himself, checking his watch. The board meeting would start in 30 minutes. Enough time to review his notes one final time before presenting the initiative that had consumed his thoughts for months. As he approached the gleaming 40-story tower, raindrops slid down his neck despite the umbrella. The Marshall Building, though he'd never named it that officially, stood as a testament to how far he'd come. Every curve of glass, every slab of marble in the lobby, had been selected with care. This was his legacy taking physical form in downtown Atlanta. Robert nodded at the security guard as he approached the entrance, but before he could reach the revolving door, a young man in a gray uniform stepped directly into his path. The valet attendant couldn't have been more than 25, with a patchy beard and eyes glued to his phone. "Sir." The young man barely glanced up, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the building with one hand. "Deliveries go through the service entrance. Around back." Robert froze, his hand suspended in mid-air. Something cold and familiar crawled up his spine, a sensation he knew all too well but hadn't expected here. Not at his own building. "Excuse me." The words came out softer than he intended. The valet finally looked up, his expression impatient. "Deliveries. Service entrance." He pointed again, more emphatically this time. "Loading dock is around back." Robert noticed another attendant watching from the valet booth, a smirk playing on his lips. The autumn wind suddenly felt colder against his skin. "I'm not making a delivery," Robert said, his voice steady despite the heat rising in his chest. "I'm here for a meeting." The valet looked him up and down, doubt clear in his eyes. "Whatever, man. Service entrance is still faster for you." He turned back to his colleague, rolling his eyes. "Some people just don't listen." In that moment, something shifted inside Robert Marshall. 40 years of similar moments, store clerks following him through aisles, security guards asking for extra ID, people clutching purses tighter in elevators, crystallized in this single interaction. Here, at the building he owned, being directed to the back door. Without another word, Robert straightened his shoulders and walked past the valet, through the revolving door, and into the soaring atrium lobby. The scent of polished marble and the subtle fragrance from the floral arrangements, peonies, his mother's favorite, filled his nostrils. His footsteps echoed across the floor as the security guard nodded with recognition. "Good morning, Mr. Marshall," the guard said, loud enough for the lobby to hear. As he crossed toward the executive elevator bank, Robert caught sight of the valet peering through the glass doors, his face suddenly drained of color as realization dawned. In the mirrored elevator climbing toward the top floor, Robert studied his reflection. At 52, his close-cropped hair had more salt than pepper these days. The tailored charcoal suit sat perfectly on his frame. His mother would have been proud of the man staring back at him. Successful, respected, accomplished. But today, none of that had mattered to a young man who saw only his skin. The elevator announced the executive floor with a soft chime. Robert straightened his tie once more, pushed the encounter to the back of his mind, and stepped out into the hallway adorned with African-American art from his personal collection. He had a meeting to lead, a company to run, and a future to build. But something had awakened inside him, a quiet determination that had been dormant for too long. If you're watching this because you've faced moments when others failed to see your true worth, take a moment to subscribe. Stories of dignity and resilience like this one deserve to be shared. As Robert entered the boardroom, the conversation immediately hushed. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward him. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. His assistant had arranged everything perfectly. Water glasses filled, presentation materials distributed, the subtle scent of fresh coffee permeating the air. "Good morning, everyone," Robert said, setting his briefcase down and taking his place at the head of the table. "Thank you for being here today." Among the board members sat Vivian Hargrove, a stern-faced woman in her late 50s with immaculately styled blonde hair and a reputation for asking the hardest questions. Next to her was Thomas Chen, who had been with Robert since the early days when they worked out of a converted warehouse. Around the table sat the power players who helped steer Marshall Innovations, each bringing their own perspective and expertise. As Robert began his presentation on the new diversity initiative, a comprehensive program to bring underrepresented youth into tech through education, mentorship, and guaranteed internships, he noticed Vivian's expression harden. Her manicured fingers tapped against the table, a sign he'd learned meant disagreement was brewing. "The program will require a significant initial investment," Robert explained, "but our projections show both social impact and long-term financial returns as we develop a pipeline of talented, loyal employees." "That's all very noble, Robert," Vivian interjected, her voice carrying the crisp precision of someone used to being listened to. "But I question whether this is the most efficient use of resources. These programs often promise more than they deliver. Are we certain the candidates will be able to meet our standards?" The slight pause before candidates hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Robert maintained his composed expression, though he felt his jaw tighten. "The candidates," he replied, emphasizing the word, "will be selected through a rigorous process. Many come from circumstances that have taught them resilience and innovative thinking that we desperately need in this industry. What they lack in traditional pathways, they make up for in potential and determination." "Determination doesn't code software, Robert," Vivian countered, several heads nodding in agreement around the table. "I'm concerned about lowering our standards for the sake of social experiments." Robert felt a flash of the same cold sensation he'd experienced earlier with the valet. Different setting, different words, same underlying message. People like him didn't belong unless they were exceptional, and even then, their presence was viewed as an accommodation rather than an asset. "Vivian," he said, his voice betraying none of the emotion churning inside him, "I started this company writing code in my mother's basement after being rejected by every major tech firm despite graduating top of my class. Not because I couldn't code, but because I didn't fit the culture. This program isn't about lowering standards. It's about recognizing talent that our industry systematically overlooks." The room fell silent. Even Vivian seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "The data supports this approach," Robert continued, turning to the next slide showing success metrics from similar programs. "Companies with diverse teams outperform homogeneous ones by 35% on average. This isn't charity. It's sound business strategy." The meeting continued for another hour, with questions becoming gradually more focused on implementation rather than justification. By the time they adjourned, Robert had secured tentative approval to move forward with the initiative's first phase, though Vivian's skepticism remained palpable. As the board members filtered out, Thomas stayed behind, clapping a hand on Robert's shoulder. "That was masterful," he said quietly. "Though I suspect you'll have more battles ahead with Vivian." Robert nodded, gathering his materials. "Some people don't understand that diversity isn't just about who's in the room. It's about whose voice is heard when they get there." "Speaking of which," Thomas said, lowering his voice, "my niece just finished her computer science degree. First in our family to go to college. Would your program have room for someone like her?" "The program is designed precisely for people like her," Robert replied with a smile. "Have her send her resume directly to me." Later, as Robert walked through the open workspace where his employees were engaged in their daily tasks, he couldn't help but notice how few of them resembled the communities just miles from this building. The diversity initiative wasn't just about abstract ideals. It was about transforming spaces like this one. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. Security called. "There's a young man at reception insisting on speaking with you. Says it's important. Name is Marcus Jenkins." Robert frowned, not recognizing the name. "Send him up," he replied after a moment's consideration. When the elevator doors opened a few minutes later, Robert immediately recognized the valet from earlier that morning. The young man stood awkwardly in the reception area, his uniform jacket damp from the rain, his cap clutched nervously in his hands. "Mr. Marshall," the young man said, his voice strained. They told me who you were after you went inside. I came to apologize." Robert studied him carefully, noticing details he hadn't earlier. The worn edges of his uniform, the cracked screen of the phone peeking from his pocket, the tension in his shoulders. "Marcus, is it?" Robert asked, gesturing toward his office. "Come in." The young man followed, his eyes widening as he took in the spacious corner office with its view of downtown Atlanta. African-American art adorned the walls, a Jacob Lawrence print, a photograph by Gordon Parks, a painting by Alma Thomas that exploded with color. Awards and certificates lined another wall, along with a framed newspaper article about Robert's journey from South Atlanta to tech innovator. "Have a seat," Robert said, indicating one of the chairs across from his desk. "Would you like some water?" Marcus nodded, seeming unable to find his voice. Robert poured water from a crystal carafe into a glass and handed it to him. "I'm sorry, sir," Marcus finally said after taking a sip. "I didn't know who you were. I never would have. Would you have treated any delivery person differently?" Robert asked, his tone gentle but direct. The question seemed to catch Marcus off guard. What? If I had been making a delivery," Robert clarified, "would that have justified directing me to the back entrance in that tone?" Marcus looked down at his cap, turning it in his hands. "No, sir. I guess not." Robert leaned back in his chair. "Do you know why I bought this building, Marcus?" "No, sir." "Because 20 years ago, I had a meeting in this very tower with a potential investor. The security guard stopped me in the lobby and questioned me for 10 minutes while white businessmen walked right past. By the time I got upstairs, the investor had left, assuming I wasn't serious enough to show up on time." Marcus winced. "That's messed up." "Yes, it was. And so was this morning. Not because of who I am, but because of how easy it was for you to assume I didn't belong at the front door. Have you ever been misjudged based on your appearance? What was that experience like for you? Share your story in the comments below." Marcus's shoulders slumped further. "I understand if you want me fired, sir." Robert studied the young man for a long moment. "That's not why I had you come up here. Tell me about yourself, Marcus. What are your aspirations beyond the valet stand?" Surprise flickered across Marcus's face. "I'm taking night classes at Georgia State. Computer science, actually. Working the valet job to pay tuition." "Computer science?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "Why that field?" "I've always been good with tech," Marcus said, a hint of pride entering his voice for the first time. "Fixed computers for everyone in my neighborhood growing up. But no one ever took it seriously as a career path for someone like me." "Someone like you," Robert repeated thoughtfully. "I just came from a board meeting where I was advocating for a program to bring more someone like you into this industry." Marcus looked up, curiosity replacing embarrassment. "What kind of program?" "Mentorship, education, guaranteed internships for underrepresented youth in tech," Robert explained. "The kind of program that might have helped you see yourself in this building for reasons other than parking cars." "That sounds amazing," Marcus said, then hesitated. "But why are you telling me this after how I treated you?" Robert stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked city. "Because moments like this morning aren't just about individual actions. They're symptoms of bigger systems that tell young men like you that you don't belong in certain spaces, and that men like me should be invisible unless we're serving a purpose." He turned back to face Marcus. "I don't want you fired. I want you educated, not just in computers, but in recognizing the barriers you help enforce, even as they hold you back too." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the same biases that made you direct me to the service entrance are related to the ones that make it harder for you to be taken seriously as a computer scientist," Robert explained. "Different sides of the same coin." Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. "I never thought about it that way." "Few people do," Robert said. "Now, if you're serious about computer science, I have a proposition for you." By the time Marcus left the office, he had agreed to apply for the pilot version of Robert's diversity initiative, though Robert made it clear he would receive no special treatment in the selection process. The young man's step was lighter as he left, the weight of his mistake somewhat lifted by the possibility of redemption. As the day progressed, Robert found his thoughts returning to both interactions, with the valet and with Vivian. Two different manifestations of the same underlying attitude, separated only by vocabulary and setting. The realization solidified his conviction that the diversity initiative wasn't just a good idea, it was a necessary one. That evening, as Robert prepared to leave, his assistant Sophia Chen knocked on his doorframe. In her mid-40s, Sophia had joined the company 3 years ago after experiencing discrimination at her previous employer, a major tech corporation that had systematically passed her over for promotions despite her qualifications. "I heard about what happened this morning," she said, closing the door behind her. "Both the Valet situation and the board meeting." Robert smiled slightly. "News travels fast." "It always does," Sophia agreed. "But that's not why I'm here. I've been compiling something you should see." She placed a folder on his desk. This contains anonymous reports from employees about instances of bias they've experienced or witnessed in the company over the past year. "I started collecting them after noticing patterns in exit interviews." Robert's brow furrowed as he opened the folder and began scanning the contents. There were dozens of reports, from subtle exclusions from important meetings to overt comments about cultural fit when discussing promotions. Some came from the executive floor, others from middle management. "I had no idea it was this pervasive," Robert said quietly, a heaviness settling in his chest. "I thought we were better than this." "Every company has these issues," Sophia replied. "The difference is whether leadership is willing to see them and address them." Robert closed the folder, his mind racing. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Sophia. This changes things." "Changes what exactly?" "The scope of our initiative," Robert said, determination hardening in his voice. "It can't just be about bringing new people in. We need to transform the environment they're coming into." Sophia nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that. I have some ideas about how we might approach it, if you're interested." "I am." "Let's discuss them first thing tomorrow." After Sophia left, Robert remained at his desk as the office gradually emptied around him. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with clouds, casting the city in premature twilight. He opened his bottom drawer and took out an old photograph. Himself as a young boy standing beside his mother in front of their modest home in South Atlanta. Her nurse's uniform was crisp despite having just finished a double shift, her smile radiant with pride as she looked at her son. "Still trying to make you proud, Mama," he whispered to the photograph. His phone rang, interrupting the moment. The caller ID showed his oldest friend, James Washington. "Bobby," James said when he answered, using the childhood nickname few were permitted to use now. "Heard you had a rough day. Dinner at my place tonight? Eleanor's making her famous gumbo." Robert smiled. Some things never changed, including James's uncanny ability to know when he needed the comfort of familiar faces. "I'll be there in an hour," he replied. If you're finding this story of perseverance and dignity meaningful, please hit the subscribe button to support more content like this. Your subscription makes these stories possible. The neighborhood where James Washington lived hadn't changed much in the 35 years since they'd grown up there together. The same narrow streets lined with modest single-story homes, the same corner store where they'd bought penny candy as children, the same church where both their mothers had dragged them every Sunday without fail. Robert parked his Audi, conspicuous on this street, and made his way to James's front porch. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal his old friend, broad-shouldered and beaming, the years evident only in the gray at his temples and the laugh lines around his eyes. "Look what the rain washed in," James boomed, pulling Robert into a bear hug that smelled of spices and familiarity. Inside, the house was warm and alive with the sounds of James's teenage daughters arguing good-naturedly over homework at the kitchen table while Eleanor, James's wife of 20 years, stirred an enormous pot of gumbo that filled the air with the aromas of andouille sausage, seafood, and complex spices. "Uncle Bobby!" the girls called in unison when they spotted him, momentarily united in their affection for their father's oldest friend. "Ladies," Robert nodded with exaggerated formality that made them giggle. He handed them each a small wrapped package, books he'd spotted that aligned with their interests. For Zoe, 16 and science-obsessed, a biography of Mae Jemison. For Amara, 14 and passionate about writing, a collection of poetry by Nikki Giovanni. "You spoil them," Eleanor said with a smile as she wiped her hands on her apron and embraced him. "Someone has to," Robert replied. "Their father certainly isn't going to." "True enough," James laughed. "Come on through to the back. Food's almost ready, but first, I want to show you something." The men stepped out onto the small back porch where James kept a modest herb garden and 2 well-worn rocking chairs, a sanctuary from the female-dominated household. The evening air was cool after the rain, carrying the scent of wet earth and neighbor's barbecue. James handed Robert a glass of bourbon, not the expensive kind Robert kept in his office for clients, but the same brand they'd sneaked from James's father's liquor cabinet as teenagers. "So," James said after they'd each taken a sip, "I hear you put some young valet in his place today." Robert chuckled. "News really does travel fast." "Who told you?" "My cousin Darnell works security in your building. Said the kid looked like he'd seen a ghost when he realized who you were." "It wasn't about putting him in his place," Robert said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "It was more complicated than that." James waited silently, knowing his friend would continue when ready. "I offered him a chance at the internship program," Robert finally said. James raised an eyebrow. "The same kid who tried to send you to the back door? That's either very Christian of you or very strategic." "Maybe a bit of both," Robert admitted. "He's studying computer science at Georgia State, working valet to pay tuition. Reminded me a bit of us at that age. Talented but without the connections to break in." James nodded thoughtfully. "So you're going to be his mentor?" "If he makes it through the selection process, which I've made clear won't be influenced by our interaction," Robert clarified. "But that's not what's really bothering me about today." "What is, then?" Robert took another sip of bourbon, letting the warmth spread through his chest before answering. "I've spent so many years proving myself, building this company, buying that building, and none of it mattered this morning. To that kid, I was just another black man who couldn't possibly belong at the front entrance." "You expected the success to shield you," James said, not as a question but as an observation. "I suppose I did," Robert admitted. "Foolish, wasn't it?" James leaned forward in his rocking chair. "Remember Mr. Townsend? Taught us history in 10th grade." Robert nodded. Of course he remembered. One of the few black male teachers at their high school, always impeccably dressed in suits that his teacher's salary surely strained to afford. "I ran into him at the grocery store last year," James continued. "Still wearing a three-piece suit to buy milk on a Sunday. I asked him why he always dressed up, even after retirement. Know what he said?" Robert shook his head. He said, "Son, I've been pulled over by police 63 times in my life without a single ticket. My dignity is the only shield I have." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with shared understanding. "Your success isn't a shield, Bobby," James said softly. "It's a platform. A platform to make changes that might mean the next generation needs fewer shields." Robert nodded slowly, the truth of his friend's words resonating deeply. "That's why I'm pushing this diversity initiative so hard. But after today, I'm wondering if it's enough." "It's a start," James said. "And starts matter." "Speaking of which," Robert said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket, "I wanted to run something by you." Inside the envelope was a proposal to partner with the community center James directed, creating a technology education program for neighborhood youth that would feed directly into Robert's corporate initiative. "This would be a game changer for our kids," James said as he reviewed the document, his voice thick with emotion. "But this is a lot of money, Bobby. Your board approved this." "Not yet," Robert admitted. "But they will." Have you ever witnessed someone using their success to create opportunities for others? What impact did that have on the community? Share your thoughts in the comments. Eleanor called them in for dinner, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics: the girls' school activities, neighborhood gossip, memories of their shared childhood. But as Robert drove home later that night, James's words echoed in his mind: "Your success isn't a shield. It's a platform." The next morning, Robert arrived at the office earlier than usual. The sky was clear after yesterday's rain, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the city. As he walked through the lobby, he nodded to the security guards and made a mental note to learn all their names. If this building was to be truly his, he needed to know every person who made it function. The valet station was staffed by different attendants today. Robert made a point of greeting them by making eye contact and offering a genuine "good morning." Their surprised responses told him all he needed to know about how they were accustomed to being treated by executives. When he reached his office, Sophia was already waiting, a stack of files and a laptop at the ready. "You look determined this morning," she observed. "I am," Robert confirmed. "I've been thinking about what you showed me yesterday. We need to expand our approach." For the next hour, They outlined a comprehensive strategy that went beyond the original initiative. It would now include internal training, policy reviews, mentorship structures, and community partnerships, starting with James's center. By the time they finished, the plan had evolved from a recruitment pipeline into a full organizational transformation. "This is ambitious," Sophia said, reviewing her notes. "Some of the board members, Vivian in particular, are going to push back hard." "Let them," Robert replied, his voice calm but firm. "If they can't see the value in this, perhaps they're not the right people to help lead this company into the future." As they wrapped up their meeting, Robert's assistant interrupted with a message. Vivian Hargrove had requested an urgent lunch meeting, just the two of them. Robert agreed, curious about her timing. They met at an upscale restaurant near the office, the kind with starched white tablecloths and waitstaff who appeared and disappeared with practiced invisibility. Vivian was already seated when he arrived, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for making time for this, Robert," she said as he sat down. "I felt we should discuss yesterday's meeting privately." Robert nodded, maintaining a neutral expression. "I appreciate the opportunity for dialogue." They ordered, her a salad with dressing on the side, him the sea base, before she broached the subject directly. "I worry you may have misinterpreted my concerns yesterday," Vivian said, her manicured fingers toying with her water glass. "My questions about the diversity initiative weren't personal." "Business is always personal, Vivian," Robert replied evenly. "Especially for those who have been systematically excluded from it." A flash of irritation crossed her face before she regained her composure. "Be that as it may, my responsibility as a board member is to question investments, particularly ones that seem emotionally driven." "And what made this particular investment seem emotionally driven rather than strategic?" Robert asked, maintaining eye contact. Vivian hesitated, perhaps hearing the trap in his question. "The lack of proven metrics, for one." "I presented 3 case studies with clear ROI figures," Robert countered. "Which specific metrics did you find lacking?" Their meals arrived, creating a momentary reprieve from the tension. When the server left, Vivian's demeanor had shifted slightly. "Robert," she said, her voice softer, "I'm not your enemy here. I've supported most of your initiatives over the years because you've proven yourself to be a shrewd businessman. But this feels different, more personal, as you said." Robert put down his fork, considering his next words carefully. He could continue the adversarial path or try a different approach. Something in Vivian's expression made him choose the latter. "You're right that it's personal," he admitted. "But that doesn't make it any less strategic. Let me ask you something, Vivian. Do you know why I never bring clients to the building through the main entrance?" She looked puzzled. "I hadn't noticed that pattern." "I take them through the side entrance from the parking garage," Robert explained. "Because despite owning the building, despite my name being on the company, I've been stopped, questioned, or misdirected in my own lobby 17 times in 5 years. Vivian's eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise registering on her face. "Yesterday morning," Robert continued, "before our meeting, a valet tried to send me to the service entrance because he assumed I was making a delivery." "That's completely unacceptable," Vivian said, and her indignation seemed genuine. "That employee should be educated," Robert interjected firmly. "Not fired, but educated. Because he's a symptom of a larger problem, the same problem our initiative aims to address." Vivian fell silent, her lunch forgotten. "The truth is, Vivian, diversity isn't just about doing the right thing. It's about seeing the blind spots that homogeneity creates. It's about identifying markets and opportunities that a homogeneous team might miss entirely. It's about innovation that comes from different perspectives colliding." Something shifted in Vivian's expression, not complete agreement, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "You've never mentioned these incidents before," she said finally. "Would it have made a difference?" Robert asked, genuinely curious. Vivian considered the question. "I'd like to think so," she said after a moment. "I've always prided myself on making decisions based on complete information." "Then perhaps that's where we start," Robert suggested. "With complete information. I'd like you to review the expanded proposal before the next board meeting. All I ask is that you approach it with an open mind." Vivian nodded slowly. I can do that. As they finished their meal, the conversation shifted to other business matters, but Robert sensed a subtle change in Vivian's attitude. Not a complete transformation, but a crack in the armor, a willingness to listen that hadn't been there before. When they parted ways outside the restaurant, Vivian surprised him with an unexpected question. Robert, does your son face these same challenges? The question caught him off guard. His son Elijah was a sophomore at Howard University, studying business with plans to eventually join his father's company. Every day, Robert answered honestly, though in different ways than I did at his age. Vivian nodded, her expression thoughtful. I have a nephew entering college next year. Brilliant boy, wants to study engineering. His mother, my sister, married a Nigerian immigrant. They live in a predominantly white suburb and I've never really considered what that might be like for him. Robert studied her face, seeing genuine concern there. It sounds like you and I have more to discuss, Vivian. Perhaps we do, she agreed, then added with a hint of a smile, bring your complete information next time. As Robert walked back to the office, he felt a cautious optimism. Change rarely happened in dramatic moments. More often, it came in small shifts of perspective, in questions newly considered, in conversations that might have been avoided before. If this story of confronting biases and creating change resonates with you, please hit the subscribe button. Together we can amplify voices that need to be heard. The following week brought a flurry of activity as Robert and his team refined the expanded initiative. Sophia had assembled a task force from various departments, ensuring diverse perspectives in both demographics and job functions. The energy was palpable as ideas flowed, challenges were identified and addressed, and a comprehensive proposal took shape. On Wednesday morning, Robert received an unexpected visitor. The receptionist announced that Charles Whitfield was in the lobby, requesting a few minutes of his time. The name was vaguely familiar, but Robert couldn't immediately place it. Send him up, he instructed, curious. When the man entered his office, recognition dawned immediately. Charles Whitfield was one of the most influential venture capitalists in the Southeast, known for his conservative investment approach and old money connections. They had crossed paths at various industry events over the years, but had never done business together. Robert, Whitfield greeted him with a firm handshake. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair and a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to power. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Of course, Robert replied, gesturing to the seating area by the window rather than maintaining the formality of his desk. What brings you here today? Whitfield settled into one of the chairs, briefly surveying the office with its art collection and awards before focusing on Robert. I'll get straight to the point, he said. I've been hearing about this diversity initiative you're developing. Word travels fast in our circles, as I'm sure you know. Robert kept his expression neutral, waiting for the direction this conversation would take. My firm has been under pressure from investors to diversify our portfolio, not just in terms of industries, but in terms of leadership demographics, Whitfield continued. Your initiative caught my attention as potentially synergistic with our needs. Synergistic, Robert repeated, a note of skepticism creeping into his voice. In what way? Whitfield leaned forward slightly. We have capital looking for diverse leadership. You have a program identifying and developing diverse talent. Perhaps there's an opportunity for collaboration. Robert studied the man across from him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Charles Whitfield represented the old guard of Atlanta business, the established networks that had systematically excluded people like Robert for generations. His sudden interest in diversity felt opportunistic at best. Mr. Whitfield, Charles, please. Charles, Robert amended, forgive my directness, but your firm has had opportunities to invest in minority-led businesses for years, including mine, in its early stages. What's changed? If Whitfield was offended by the question, he didn't show it. Instead, he chuckled softly. The market has changed. ESG considerations now impact valuations. Diverse leadership teams are showing stronger performances. And yes, I'll admit, we've been slow to adapt. So this is purely a business decision, Robert clarified. Isn't that what you've been arguing? That diversity isn't charity, it's good business. Whitfield countered smoothly. I may be late to recognize this, but I'm not too proud to acknowledge when market conditions evolve. Robert found himself in an unexpected position. Whitfield's interest was clearly self-serving, yet it represented exactly the kind of systemic shift his initiative aimed to create, making diversity a business imperative rather than a moral one. "What exactly are you proposing?" Robert asked. "A partnership," Whitfield replied. "Your program identifies and develops talent. We provide additional funding and open doors to our network. In return, we get early access to promising entrepreneurs and the public association with a proven diversity advocate, you." "And what happens when the market shifts again?" Robert asked pointedly. "When diversity is no longer the trending consideration?" Whitfield's expression remained impassive. "Business has always been about adaptation, Robert. I'm simply adapting. The question is whether you want to capitalize on that adaptation to further your goals." There was a cold logic to his argument that Robert couldn't entirely dismiss. Still, something about the proposal felt hollow, a superficial response to deeper systemic issues. "I appreciate your interest," Robert said carefully, "but I'll need to consider how this aligns with our values and long-term vision. My concern is that we're approaching this from fundamentally different perspectives." "Perhaps," Whitfield conceded, standing to leave. "But different perspectives collaborating is what you're advocating for, isn't it? Think about it. My offer remains open." After Whitfield left, Robert sat by the window, watching the autumn leaves swirl in the wind below. The conversation had unsettled him in ways he hadn't expected. Whitfield's interest represented both an opportunity and a compromise, a chance to accelerate change but potentially at the cost of its authenticity. Later that afternoon, Robert had a scheduled meeting with Marcus Jenkins, the valet who had been accepted into the pilot program based on his qualifications. The young man arrived precisely on time, dressed not in his uniform but in a clean button-down shirt and khakis, clearly his best attempt at business casual. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Marshall," Marcus said, his nervousness evident in how tightly he gripped the portfolio in his hands. "Congratulations on being selected for the program," Robert said, genuinely pleased by the young man's acceptance. "The committee was impressed with your application." Marcus's face lit up with pride. "I wasn't sure I'd make it, especially after, you know." "The selection process is blind," Robert assured him. "You earned your place on merit. Now, tell me about your project ideas." For the next half hour, Marcus walked Robert through his concept for an app that would help first-generation college students navigate financial aid, course selection, and career preparation challenges he was facing himself. His passion was evident, and despite his occasional nervousness, his technical knowledge was solid. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this," Robert commented when Marcus finished. "What resources do you need to develop a prototype?" "Mainly guidance on the back-end database structure," Marcus admitted. "And maybe some mentorship on the business plan aspect. The coding I can handle." Robert nodded, making notes. "I'll connect you with our database team for technical support, and I think you should meet James Washington from the community center we're partnering with. He has experience developing programs for exactly the population you're targeting." Marcus's eyes widened. "You'd do that? Connect me directly with your team." "That's what this program is about, Marcus. Opening doors that talent like yours should already have access to." As they wrapped up the meeting, Marcus hesitated at the door. "Mr. Marshall, I keep thinking about what you said that first day. About systems that keep people like me parking cars instead of building software. What about it?" "I'm starting to see those systems everywhere now," Marcus said, his expression troubled. "Like I was wearing blinders before, and now they're off. Some of my friends think I'm overthinking everything, but once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them," Robert finished for him. Marcus nodded emphatically. "Exactly. Is it always going to be this exhausting?" Robert smiled sympathetically. "Awareness is the first step, but it can be the heaviest one. The key is to channel that awareness into action rather than letting it weigh you down." "How do you do that?" Marcus asked, his question earnest. "By remembering that changing systems happens one interaction, one opportunity, one door opened at a time," Robert replied. "Focus on what you can influence today, while keeping the bigger picture in mind." After Marcus left, Robert reflected on his own advice. The conversation with Whitfield earlier represented exactly that kind of opportunity. Imperfect, complex, but potentially impactful. Perhaps principles and pragmatism didn't have to be mutually exclusive. Do you believe lasting change comes from working within existing systems or creating new ones entirely? What has been most effective in your experience? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. That evening, Robert received an unexpected call from Vivian Hargrove. Her voice sounded different than her usual confident tone, hesitant, perhaps even vulnerable. "Robert, I apologize for calling after hours," she began, "but I've been reviewing the expanded proposal, and I have questions." "Not criticisms," she clarified quickly, "but genuine questions that I'd prefer to discuss outside the boardroom setting." "Of course," Robert replied, intrigued by this new approach. "When would you like to meet?" "Actually," Vivian said, hesitation clear in her voice, "I was hoping you might be willing to come to my home for dinner tomorrow evening. My nephew Kevin will be there, the one I mentioned who's applying to engineering schools. I think hearing your perspective might be valuable for him. And for me." The invitation surprised Robert. In all the years they'd worked together, their relationship had remained strictly professional, confined to boardrooms and occasional business lunches. "I'd be happy to join you," he said, sensing the significance of the gesture. "Wonderful. I'll text you the address. 7 o'clock. 7 works perfectly." The following evening, Robert drove to Vivian's address in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhoods. Her home was exactly as he'd imagined, a stately colonial behind a manicured lawn, the kind of generational wealth that seemed to announce itself without trying. Vivian greeted him at the door herself, dressed more casually than he'd ever seen her in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks. She seemed almost nervous as she welcomed him inside. "Thank you for coming," she said, taking his coat. "Kevin is excited to meet you. He's read about your company's technological innovations." The interior of Vivian's home was tastefully decorated in neutral tones, family photos arranged carefully on surfaces, everything in its proper place. In the living room, a young man stood as they entered. Kevin was tall and lanky, with warm brown skin and intelligent eyes that lit up when he saw Robert. "Mr. Marshall," he said, extending his hand with practiced confidence. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." "The honor is mine, Kevin," Robert replied, genuinely impressed by the young man's poise. "Your aunt tells me you're interested in engineering?" "Yes, sir. Computer engineering specifically. I'm hoping for Georgia Tech or MIT." "With his grades and extracurriculars, he has a good chance at either," Vivian interjected with unmistakable pride. "Kevin has been top of his class since elementary school." Dinner was served in a formal dining room, the table set with what appeared to be heirloom china. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, with Kevin asking thoughtful questions about the technology industry and Robert's career path. "What challenges should I prepare for?" Kevin asked directly as they moved to dessert. "As a black man entering engineering?" Robert noticed Vivian tense slightly at the directness of the question, but she remained silent, waiting for his response. "The technical challenges will be the easy part," Robert said honestly. "You'll face 2 more difficult challenges: proving yourself repeatedly where others are given the benefit of the doubt, and maintaining your authentic voice when there's pressure to assimilate." Kevin nodded seriously. "I already feel some of that at school. There are only 3 black students in the advanced STEM program, and the teachers seem surprised when we know the answers." "Kevin," Vivian interjected with a note of caution, "I'm sure your teachers are just being thorough with everyone." "Actually, Aunt Vivian," Kevin replied respectfully but firmly, "Ms. Chambers calls on me specifically when the topic is sports-related but skips over me during the advanced calculus discussions, even when my hand is up." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Robert watched as various emotions crossed Vivian's face: defensiveness, doubt, and then something like realization. "I didn't know that," she said finally, looking troubled. "It's okay," Kevin assured her quickly. "I handle it. Dad has taught me a lot about navigating those situations." "Your father is Nigerian, correct?" Robert asked, recalling Vivian's mention of her sister's husband. "Yes, sir. He came here for medical school and stayed. He's a cardiologist now." "And what has he taught you about navigating these situations?" Robert was genuinely curious. Kevin glanced at his aunt before answering. He says excellence is necessary but not sufficient. That I need to be strategic about which battles to fight and which to let go. And that I should build networks of support wherever I go. Wise advice, Robert nodded. I'd add one thing. Find mentors who understand your specific challenges, but don't limit yourself only to those who share your background. Diverse mentorship is as important as any other form of diversity. After dinner, Vivian suggested Kevin show Robert his coding projects while she prepared coffee. The young man led Robert to a small home office where he'd set up an impressive workstation. This is the app I'm developing for my senior project, Kevin explained, pulling up a screen of clean, elegant code. It uses machine learning to predict traffic patterns and suggest optimal commute times for reducing carbon emissions. This is extraordinary work for a high school student, Robert said, genuinely impressed as he scrolled through the code. Where did you learn these skills? Mostly online courses and YouTube tutorials, Kevin admitted. My school's computer science program is limited. When Vivian called them back for coffee, Robert noticed her watching her nephew with new eyes, seeing, perhaps for the first time, both his extraordinary potential and the invisible barriers he faced. As the evening drew to a close, Vivian walked Robert to his car, the autumn night crisp around them. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I think I understand your initiative better now. Seeing Kevin's talent, hearing his experiences, it makes things more concrete. He's an exceptional young man, Robert agreed. You should be proud. I've always been proud of his achievements, Vivian said, but I'm realizing I've been naive about his challenges. When my sister married Olu, I thought their children would have the best of both worlds. I didn't consider how society might still see them primarily through the lens of race. It's a common blind spot, Robert said gently. Vivian nodded, then straightened her shoulders with renewed purpose. I've made some notes on your proposal. Not objections this time, but suggestions for strengthening certain aspects. May I send them to you tomorrow? I'd welcome your input, Robert replied, genuinely pleased by this unexpected alliance. As he drove home, Robert reflected on the evening. People rarely changed their fundamental perspectives overnight, but meaningful shifts often began with personal connections, putting faces and stories to abstract concepts like diversity and opportunity. Kevin had accomplished in one dinner what Robert's data-filled presentations might never have achieved. If you found value in this story about making connections that bridge understanding, please consider subscribing to support more content that explores these important human journeys. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Robert spent the intervening days building support for the expanded initiative. Vivian had become an unexpected ally, her suggestions for the proposal both practical and insightful. With her influence, several other board members who had been on the fence began showing interest. The morning of the board meeting, Robert arrived early to find Thomas Chen waiting for him. His old friend and colleague looked troubled. We need to talk before the meeting, Thomas said without preamble. Charles Whitfield has been making calls to board members. Robert felt a flicker of concern. What kind of calls? He's offering to create a joint venture fund specifically for diverse entrepreneurs coming through our program, Thomas explained. $50 million in initial funding, with potential for more based on performance. He mentioned a partnership when he visited, Robert acknowledged, but nothing that specific. Has he reached out to you directly? Thomas nodded. Last night. He was particularly interested in how the board would vote on your expanded initiative. He implied his fund would only move forward if the full proposal passed. Robert frowned. Whitfield's tactics felt manipulative, leveraging his financial influence to shape the program in ways that might benefit him more than the participants. What did you tell him? Robert asked. That board deliberations are confidential, Thomas replied. But privately, I'm concerned about his involvement. His firm doesn't exactly have a history of supporting minority entrepreneurs. No, they don't, Robert agreed. But if his money opens doors that have been historically closed, does his motivation matter? It matters if it comes with hidden strings, Thomas countered. You know how these things work, Bobby. Nothing is ever free in this world, especially not $50 million. Robert sighed, feeling the weight of the decision before him. Let's see how the board meeting unfolds. We'll address Whitfield's offer if it comes up. The boardroom filled gradually, the atmosphere charged with an energy different from their previous meeting. Robert noted how Vivian made a point of greeting him warmly, a signal to others that their usual adversarial dynamic had shifted. When everyone was seated, Robert began his presentation of the expanded initiative. The proposal had evolved significantly, incorporating not only the original diversity pipeline but also internal training programs, policy reviews, community partnerships, and measurable accountability metrics. The budget had increased accordingly, which would typically have been a sticking point. As expected, Charles Whitfield's offer came up during the discussion phase. "I've been contacted by Whitfield Capital regarding a potential joint venture," one board member mentioned. "50 million is significant backing." "I received a similar call," another added. "It seems like a tremendous opportunity to amplify our impact." Robert listened carefully to the discussion swirling around the table, noting how the conversation had shifted from questioning whether the initiative was necessary to debating how best to implement and fund it. Whitfield's offer had effectively changed the calculus, making the financial commitment seem less burdensome to the company. When the time came for his response, Robert chose his words carefully. "Whitfield Capital's interest is certainly flattering," he began, "and potentially valuable. However, I believe we should evaluate their offer separately from our vote on this initiative. Our commitment to transformation should stand on its own merits, not be contingent on external validation or funding." Vivian surprised him by speaking up in support. "I agree with Robert. We should approve this initiative because it's the right strategic direction for our company, not because it attracts outside investment. That said, if we approve the initiative, I would support exploring partnerships that align with our goals and values." The subtle emphasis on "align with our values" didn't go unnoticed. Several heads nodded in agreement. When the vote came, the expanded initiative passed unanimously, a result Robert had scarcely dared to hope for just weeks earlier. The board also authorized a committee, led by Robert and including Vivian, to evaluate potential partnerships, including Whitfield's offer. After the meeting, as board members filtered out, Vivian lingered. "Congratulations," she said sincerely. "You've accomplished something significant here." "We have," Robert corrected her. "Your support made a difference." Vivian smiled slightly. "Enlightened self-interest, perhaps. I want my nephew to enter an industry that values his brilliance, not one that questions his belonging. Whatever the motivation, I'm grateful for the alliance," Robert replied. "About Whitfield's offer," Vivian added, lowering her voice. "Proceed with caution. I've known Charles for years through various social circles. He's brilliant at finding ways to benefit from shifting trends without fundamentally changing his approach." "I suspected as much," Robert nodded. "We'll structure any partnership carefully." As Vivian left, Robert remained in the boardroom, taking a moment to absorb what had just happened. The initiative that had begun as a response to a personal slight had evolved into something much more significant, a comprehensive approach to transformation that had the company's full backing. His phone buzzed with a text from James. Heard the good news. "Your mama would be proud, Bobby. Celebration dinner tonight." Robert smiled, texting back his acceptance. Some victories needed to be marked properly, with the people who understood the full journey. The weeks that followed brought both progress and new challenges. The diversity initiative launched with significant media coverage, positioning Marshall Innovations as a leader in corporate transformation. Applications flooded in from talented candidates who had previously felt the tech industry was closed to them. Robert maintained a careful distance from Charles Whitfield, instructing his team to conduct thorough due diligence on the proposed partnership. The more they investigated, the more concerns emerged about Whitfield Capital's past practices, including several instances where they had acquired and dismantled minority-owned businesses. One Tuesday morning, Robert received an unexpected visitor. His assistant announced that Eliza Whitfield, Charles's wife, was requesting to see him. Curious, he agreed to the meeting. Eliza Whitfield was elegant and poised, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a classic chignon, her designer outfit understated but clearly expensive. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to moving in influential circles. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment, Mr. Marshall," she said as she took the offered seat. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I felt this conversation would be better conducted in person rather than over the phone." "Of course," Robert replied, intrigued. "How can I help you, Mrs. Whitfield?" "Eliza, please," she corrected with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I understand my husband has proposed a partnership with your company regarding your diversity initiative." "That's correct," Robert confirmed, keeping his expression neutral. "We're still evaluating the proposal." Eliza nodded, glancing momentarily at the artwork on Robert's walls before returning her gaze to him. "I'll be direct, Mr. Marshall. I believe you should decline Charles's offer." Whatever Robert had been expecting, it wasn't this. That's an unusual position for a wife to take regarding her husband's business dealings. "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but I have my reasons. Charles views your initiative as an opportunity to improve his firm's image without making substantive changes to how they operate. The $50 million he's offering? It's a bargain compared to the reputational benefit he stands to gain by associating with your work." Robert studied her carefully, trying to discern her motivation. "Why are you telling me this, Eliza?" She hesitated, seeming to consider her words. "I chair the board of the Atlanta Educational Foundation. For years, I've been advocating for programs that support underprivileged students entering STEM fields. Charles has consistently minimized the importance of this work, calling it my charity project." Her expression hardened slightly. "But it's not charity, Mr. Marshall. It's investment in human potential. When I saw your initiative, I recognized a kindred approach, one that acknowledges systemic barriers while creating practical pathways to overcome them." "And you believe a partnership with your husband's firm would undermine that approach?" Robert asked, putting the pieces together. "I know it would," Eliza stated firmly. "Charles would insist on controlling the narrative, centering his firm's generosity rather than the participants' achievements. He would cherry-pick the most conventionally impressive candidates and gradually shift the criteria away from your original vision." Robert leaned back in his chair, processing this unexpected intervention. "You're taking a significant risk coming to me like this." A sad smile crossed Eliza's face. "Charles and I have maintained separate spheres for years, Mr. Marshall. My social and philanthropic work doesn't intersect with his business ventures. This is perhaps the first time I've directly opposed him, but I believe the stakes warrant it." "What would you suggest as an alternative?" Robert asked, curious to hear her perspective. "Your company has the resources to fund this initiative independently," Eliza pointed out. "But if external partnership would be beneficial, I'd suggest approaching the Atlanta Educational Foundation instead. We don't have $50 million to offer, but we have 20 years of experience in this space and an extensive network of educators and mentors who understand the challenges your participants will face." The proposal was intriguing and potentially more aligned with the initiative's true goals than Whitfield's offer. Still, Robert was cautious. "Would such a partnership create difficulties in your personal life?" he asked delicately. Eliza's laugh held little humor. "Charles pays attention to my foundation work only when it intersects with his social circles. He's unlikely to notice or care about a partnership with your company's diversity program. And if he does..." She straightened her shoulders. "Some principles are worth standing firm on." By the end of their meeting, Robert had agreed to have his team explore a potential partnership with Eliza's foundation while putting Whitfield Capital's offer on hold. As he walked her to the elevator, Eliza turned to him with a parting thought. "You know, Mr. Marshall, change rarely comes from where we expect it. Sometimes the most effective allies emerge from the very systems we're trying to transform." Her words stayed with him long after she'd gone, resonating with his own evolving understanding of how change happens, not always through confrontation, but sometimes through unexpected alliances and quiet revolutions from within. When moments of courage and unexpected alliances inspire you, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support helps these powerful stories reach those who need to hear them. The partnership with the Atlanta Educational Foundation progressed rapidly, bringing valuable expertise and resources to the initiative. Eliza Whitfield proved to be a knowledgeable and committed partner, her years of experience complementing Robert's vision in ways that strengthened the program. Charles Whitfield's reaction to the rejection of his offer came in the form of a terse email expressing disappointment in the missed opportunity and suggesting that Robert was letting idealism cloud business judgment. The absence of any mention of his wife's foundation confirmed Eliza's assessment that he paid little attention to her work. 6 weeks after the board's approval, the initiative was fully operational. The first cohort of participants had been selected, mentorship pairs established, and training programs implemented. The internal cultural transformation was proving more challenging, with pockets of resistance among middle management, but progress was steady. Robert maintained regular check-ins with Marcus Jenkins, watching with satisfaction as the young man thrived in the program. His app concept had evolved into a promising prototype, attracting attention from both technical mentors and potential users. One Friday afternoon, as Robert wrapped up the workweek, his assistant informed him that Sophia Chen needed to see him urgently. She entered his office with a troubled expression, closing the door firmly behind her. "We have a situation," she said without preamble, placing a folder on his desk. "Jason Reynolds in product development has been systematically undermining the initiative." Robert opened the folder to find emails, meeting notes, and testimonials documenting a pattern of behavior. Scheduled mentorship sessions mysteriously cancelled, resources promised but never delivered, subtle discouragement of program participants. "How long has this been going on?" Robert asked, a cold anger settling in his chest. "Since the beginning, but it's escalated over the past 2 weeks," Sophia explained. "He's been particularly focused on sabotaging Marcus Jenkins's project, reassigning the database developers who were supposed to support him and questioning his technical abilities to other managers." Robert frowned. Jason Reynolds had been with the company for nearly a decade, rising through the ranks to become a senior product manager. His technical skills were excellent, but there had always been something off about his interpersonal dynamics, particularly with younger employees from diverse backgrounds. "Have you spoken with him directly?" Robert asked. "Yes, yesterday," Sophia confirmed. "He claimed it was all just normal resource management during a busy period, but then I showed him documentation of the pattern. He became defensive, then dismissive, suggesting I was seeing discrimination where there's just business reality." Robert sighed, recognizing the familiar deflection tactic. "What do you recommend?" "HR would typically suggest a performance improvement plan," Sophia replied. "But given the sensitivity of this situation and the clear intent to undermine company initiatives, I believe stronger action is warranted." Robert nodded slowly. "Arrange a meeting with Jason first thing Monday morning. Include Thomas Chen as well. He's known Jason longer than either of us." The weekend passed quickly, with Robert dividing his time between family obligations and preparation for the confrontation ahead. By Monday morning, he had reviewed Jason's entire employment history, noting a pattern of excellent technical performance coupled with consistently mediocre scores in team collaboration and mentorship. Jason arrived at the meeting looking confident, even slightly smug. Thomas and Sophia were already seated when Robert entered the conference room, closing the door behind him. "Thank you for joining us, Jason," Robert began, his tone professionally neutral. "I believe you know why we're here." Jason leaned back in his chair, his posture deliberately casual. Sophia mentioned some concerns about resource allocation. "I'm sure we can clear this up quickly. We're all just trying to meet our targets here." "The concern is not about resource allocation," Robert corrected him. "It's about your systematic undermining of the diversity initiative that was unanimously approved by the board and is now company policy." He slid the folder of evidence across the table. Jason glanced at it without opening it, his expression hardening slightly. "With all due respect, Robert, I think this initiative is distracting us from our core business. We're a technology company, not a social justice organization." "The initiative is our business," Robert replied evenly. "The board determined that building a diverse talent pipeline and creating an inclusive culture are strategic priorities, not distractions." "Look," Jason said, leaning forward, "I'm just trying to maintain standards. Some of these new recruits aren't at the level we typically hire. They need more hand-holding, more resources. That affects deadlines and quality." "Which recruits specifically are you referring to?" Thomas asked, speaking up for the first time. "I've reviewed the technical assessments for all participants. Their scores are comparable to or exceeding our regular hiring standards." Jason's confidence wavered slightly. "It's not just about test scores. It's about cultural fit, about understanding how things work in a professional environment." "Cultural fit," Robert repeated, the quotation marks audible in his tone. "That phrase has been used to exclude qualified candidates for generations, Jason. It's often code for people who look and think like me." "That's not what I meant," Jason protested, though his eyes slid away from Robert's steady gaze. "Then let's be specific," Robert pressed. "You've canceled 4 mentorship sessions with Marcus Jenkins, reassigned the database resources promised to his project, and questioned his technical abilities to 3 different managers, despite the fact that his technical assessment was in the 90th percentile of all candidates we've ever tested." Jason shifted uncomfortably. Jenkins needs more supervision than other interns. He doesn't understand corporate protocols. Marcus worked his way through college, Robert countered. He holds a job while completing his degree. He developed a functional prototype with minimal support after you withdrew resources. What he lacks isn't ability or work ethic. It's the benefit of growing up with parents who worked in corporate environments, with relatives who could explain unwritten rules, with schools that prepared him for these specific settings. The room fell silent as Robert's words landed. Jason stared at the table, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Here's what's going to happen," Robert continued, his voice firm but not unkind. "You have 2 options. The first is immediate termination for actively undermining company initiatives and creating a hostile environment for program participants." Jason's head snapped up, shock evident on his face. "Termination? That's extreme for what amounts to a disagreement about priorities." "Your second option," Robert continued as if he hadn't been interrupted, "is a reassignment. You would step down from your management role and take a senior individual contributor position on the technical side. You would also participate fully in our inclusion training program and work directly with a coach on addressing your biases. After 6 months, we would reassess your eligibility for management responsibilities." The color drained from Jason's face as he realized the seriousness of the situation. I need time to consider my options." "You have until the end of the day," Robert replied, standing to indicate the meeting was over. "I suggest you use that time to reflect honestly on the values you want to guide your career moving forward." After Jason left, Thomas let out a low whistle. "That was tough but necessary," he said. "Jason's had performance issues with diverse team members for years, but we never connected the dots clearly enough. Or we connected them but didn't prioritize addressing the pattern," Robert corrected gently. "Which makes us complicit in its continuation." "What do you think he'll choose?" Sophia asked. "I honestly don't know," Robert admitted. "But either way, we've sent a clear message about what this company values and what it doesn't tolerate." By late afternoon, Jason had requested the reassignment option, though his email response was terse and devoid of any acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Robert accepted the decision with mixed feelings, hopeful that Jason might eventually gain new perspective, but realistic about the likelihood of fundamental change in someone so resistant. The following day, Robert called Marcus Jenkins to his office to personally apologize for the obstacles that had been placed in his path and to assure him that the situation had been addressed. Marcus seemed relieved but unsurprised by the revelation of Jason's behavior. "I knew something was off," he admitted, "but I figured proving myself despite the roadblocks was just part of the process." "It shouldn't be," Robert said firmly. "Excellence should be required equally of everyone, but opportunity and support should be as well." As Marcus left, visibly more confident than he'd been entering the office, Robert felt both satisfaction at having addressed an immediate problem and sobered by the recognition of how much work remained. Cultural transformation was never quick or simple. It required constant vigilance, consistent accountability, and the courage to make difficult decisions even when they created discomfort. That evening, driving home through the golden autumn light, Robert found himself reflecting on the past few weeks. The humiliation at the entrance of his own building had triggered a cascade of events that were now reshaping not just his company but potentially the wider business community. Personal pain had been transformed into systemic change, not through vengeance, but through strategic vision and unwavering commitment to core values. His phone rang through the car's speaker system. It was Eliza Whitfield. "Robert," she said when he answered, "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "Not at all," he assured her. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to let you know that Charles will be announcing a new diversity initiative for Whitfield Capital tomorrow," she said, a note of amusement in her voice. Apparently, several major clients have been asking why they haven't followed Marshall Innovations' lead. Robert couldn't help but chuckle. "Market forces at work, I suppose." "Indeed," Eliza agreed. "He's framing it as their own innovative approach, of course. No mention of your program as inspiration." The important thing is that it happens, Robert replied. Whatever the motivation. That's very generous of you, Eliza said, then added more seriously, the Foundation Board is extremely pleased with our partnership, by the way. Your program participants have been impressively engaged with our mentorship network. The synergy has been beneficial for everyone, Robert acknowledged. Though I suspect we have you to thank for much of that success. Team effort, Eliza demurred. Speaking of which, I wanted to invite you to speak at our annual gala next month. Your perspective on creating pathways for underrepresented talent would be invaluable to our donors. I'd be honored, Robert replied sincerely. After ending the call, he found himself smiling at the irony, being asked to inspire the very social circles that had once excluded him. Life had a way of coming full circle, though rarely in the ways one might expect. Have you ever witnessed how a single moment of injustice can spark meaningful change when channeled correctly? Share your experiences in the comments below. 3 months after the launch of the Diversity Initiative, Robert was invited to give a keynote address at Georgia State University. The event had been organized by the business school to highlight corporate social responsibility, with students from across the university encouraged to attend. As Robert stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse faces of the next generation of professionals, he felt a profound sense of purpose. Among the audience, he spotted Marcus Jenkins sitting with a group of friends, all leaning forward attentively. In the back row, somewhat surprisingly, sat Vivian Hargrove beside her nephew Kevin, who had apparently been accepted to Georgia Tech's engineering program. 10 years ago, Robert began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, I was denied entry to a meeting with a potential investor because a security guard didn't believe I belonged in the building. 5 years ago, I bought that building. 3 months ago, at the entrance of that same building, I was directed to the service door by a young man who saw only my skin color, not my position. A murmur ran through the audience. I could share 100 such stories from my life, Robert continued. From being followed in stores as a child to being asked to prove I belonged in first class on flights as an adult. Many of you in this room have your own versions of these stories. Heads nodded in recognition throughout the audience. The easy response to such moments is anger, or resignation, or a determination to prove our worth through individual success. I've felt all of these at different times, Robert admitted. But I've come to believe that true transformation requires something more. It requires us to channel these personal experiences into systemic change. He described the initiative in detail, not just the recruitment and mentorship aspects, but the internal cultural transformation, the policy reviews, the accountability metrics, and the community partnerships. The most important lesson I've learned through this process, Robert said, is that change rarely happens through dramatic confrontations or public shaming. It happens through strategic vision, through building unexpected alliances, through persistent pressure at key leverage points in the system. He made eye contact with various students as he spoke, noting their engaged expressions. Some would argue that true change can only come from outside existing power structures. Others believe we must work within the system to transform it. I've found that the most effective approach combines both, maintaining principles while finding pragmatic paths forward, challenging the status quo while building bridges to those who benefit from it. As he concluded his address, Robert shared a final thought that had been crystallizing in his mind over the past months. The greatest key you can possess is not just the power to open doors for yourself, but the wisdom and courage to hold those doors open for others, especially when others try to close them. Our individual success means little if it doesn't create pathways for those who come after us. The applause was immediate and sustained, students rising to their feet in appreciation not just of his words but of the concrete actions behind them. As Robert stepped away from the podium, he caught sight of Marcus Jenkins's face, filled with a determination that mirrored his own at that age. After the formal Q&A session, Robert found himself surrounded by students eager to share their experiences and ask for advice. He noticed Vivian and Kevin waiting patiently at the edge of the group. When the crowd finally thinned, they approached. That was quite moving, Robert, Vivian said, her typical businesslike demeanor softened with genuine appreciation. Kevin insisted we attend. He's been following your company's initiative closely. It's exactly the kind of program I want to be part of someday, Kevin added enthusiastically. Creating tech that solves real problems while building pathways for people like me. With your talent, you'll have many options, Robert assured him. Just remember what I said about holding doors open. Kevin nodded seriously. I already tutor younger students in coding. Small steps, right? The most important kind, Robert agreed. As they parted ways, Vivian lingered a moment longer. I want you to know that our conversation about Kevin changed how I view many things, she said quietly. Not just in business, but in my personal life as well. Thank you for that. Growth is rarely comfortable, Robert acknowledged, but it's always valuable. Later that evening, Robert received a text from James with a link to a news article. Charles Whitfield had announced a significant expansion of Whitfield Capital's diversity initiative, including a $50 million fund specifically for minority entrepreneurs in the Southeast. Looks like somebody doesn't like being outdone, James commented. Robert smiled at the message. Competition was a powerful motivator, especially for someone like Whitfield. Whatever his reasons, the funding would create opportunities that hadn't existed before. Change came in many forms, through many channels. What mattered was that it came. The following week brought an unexpected development. Marcus Jenkins requested a meeting, arriving with a polished presentation and a confidence that had grown noticeably over the past months. I wanted to show you the final version of my app before the showcase next week, he explained, connecting his laptop to the display in Robert's office. The application had evolved significantly from his initial concept. Now called First Gen Navigator, it combined financial aid guidance, academic planning tools, and career preparation resources with a social networking component that connected first-generation students across different universities. This is impressive work, Marcus, Robert said sincerely as he navigated through the various features. The user interface is particularly intuitive. Thank you, sir, Marcus replied, then hesitated before adding, but that's not actually the main reason I wanted to meet. Robert raised an eyebrow questioningly. I've been thinking about our first conversation, Marcus continued, about systems that keep people like me parking cars instead of building software. And about what you said at Georgia State, about holding doors open for others. He took a deep breath before continuing. There are 5 other valets at the building. All of them are students, all from backgrounds similar to mine. None of them know about this program or believe they could qualify for something like it. Robert nodded, beginning to see where this was heading. I'd like to create a specific outreach component for service workers in and around your buildings, Marcus proposed. The valets, the maintenance staff, the cafeteria workers, people with talent and ambition who don't see themselves as potential tech workers because no one has ever told them they could be. The proposal was both simple and profound, recognizing an invisible population of potential talent that existed literally at their doorstep. What would you need to make this happen? Robert asked. Permission to use the building common areas for information sessions after hours, Marcus replied promptly. Some of the current mentors willing to attend and speak. And maybe your presence at the first session. Your story would resonate with them. Consider it done, Robert said without hesitation. Draft a formal proposal for my review, but you have my full support. Marcus's face lit up with excitement. Thank you, sir. This could change lives. It already has, Robert observed quietly. Starting with yours. As autumn deepened toward winter, the transformation Robert had initiated continued to unfold in expected and unexpected ways. The diversity program participants were excelling, with several projects attracting attention from industry leaders. The internal culture was evolving, though not without occasional resistance and setbacks. Marcus's outreach to service workers had identified several promising candidates for the next cohort, including one of the very valets who had witnessed his interaction with Robert that rainy morning. If this story of transformation and opening doors for others has touched you, please hit the subscribe button to support more content that explores our shared humanity and the power of dignity in the face of injustice. The morning was crisp with early winter chill, the trees around the Marshall building now bare against a clear blue sky. Robert paused outside the main entrance, observing the newly installed sign that bore the company name rather than his own, a recent change he'd made to emphasize that the success belonged to many, not just to him. The valet station was staffed by a young woman he recognized from Marcus's outreach program, a community college student studying information systems while working full-time. She straightened immediately when she saw him. "Good morning, Mr. Marshall," she greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Tanya," he replied, pleased that he remembered her name. "How are your classes going?" Her surprise at being remembered quickly gave way to enthusiasm. Really well, sir. I'm using what I learned at the information session to apply for a scholarship next semester. Excellent, Robert nodded. Let Marcus know if you need any advice with the application. As he entered the lobby, he noticed a tour group being led by Sophia, participants from a partner organization seeing the company's operations firsthand. Among them, he recognized Martha Johnson, his former teacher and longtime mentor, now in her late 60s but still razor-sharp and passionate about creating opportunities for the next generation. Martha spotted him and broke away from the group momentarily to greet him. Her embrace was fierce despite her diminutive stature. "You've done good, Bobby," she said with the directness that had always characterized their relationship. "Your mama would be so proud to see what you've built here." "I had excellent teachers," Robert replied, the simple words carrying the weight of decades of gratitude. Martha patted his cheek affectionately before rejoining her group. "You still do. Learning never stops, child." In his office, Robert found an invitation waiting on his desk. The Atlanta Business Leadership Council was requesting his presence as keynote speaker at their annual awards dinner, the same event where, 15 years earlier, he had been mistaken for a server while attempting to network with potential investors. The irony brought a smile to his face as he picked up the phone to accept. Life did indeed move in circles, but with each rotation, the view expanded, the perspective deepened, and the possibility for meaningful change grew stronger. As he prepared for his morning meetings, Robert glanced at the photograph of his mother that held a permanent place on his desk. Her wisdom echoed in his mind, "Baby, dignity isn't what other people give you. It's what you hold onto no matter what they do." He had held onto his dignity that rainy morning at the entrance to his building. But more importantly, he had transformed that moment into a catalyst for change that would help others claim and keep their dignity as well. Not through revenge or public shaming, but through strategic vision, unexpected alliances, and an unwavering commitment to opening doors that had too long been closed. Outside his window, the city stretched toward the horizon, buildings catching the winter sunlight, streets filled with people moving purposefully through their day. Each person carried their own dignity, their own potential, their own unique contribution to the world. The true measure of success, Robert had come to believe, wasn't in the height of the towers one built, but in how many people found their way inside those towers who might otherwise have been left standing at the door. If this story has touched you or made you reflect on the power of dignity and quiet transformation, please click on the video appearing on your screen now for an even more powerful journey of courage and change that will inspire you to see the world through new eyes.